Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Stephen Sacker. Here in London and around the world, the election of Barack Obama was seen as a watershed moment in race relations in America. The country's first black president was taken as the symbol of a new post-racial era. But now, with tensions between black communities and the police running sky high, is anyone still talking about a post-racial United States? Well, my guest today is Cornel West, leading academic, writer, civil rights campaigner, and fierce critic of Barack Obama. Why has the race debate turned so sour? Cornel West, welcome to Hard Talk.
I am very blessed to be here.
I think we have to start with the fallout from events in Ferguson, Missouri. The killing of the teenager Michael Brown at the hands of a police officer. Since then, there's been violence, there have been political ramifications. You said it represents, and I'm quoting you here, the end of the age of Obama. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, what I meant was that so many of us had tremendous hope at the beginning of the age of Obama. The very idea of a black man going to the White House, primarily built by black slaves, the idea of a reversal given the very ugly legacy of white supremacy in the United States. And we had high hopes for his presidency. And what we have seen is the choices that not just he, but of course his party, Democratic Party, has made, both a Wall Street presidency as opposed to a Main Street presidency, a drone presidency rather than curtailing of drones, a massive surveillance presidency that Edward Snowden and others have revealed, rather than fighting for rights and liberties. And now we get to the issue of race. And you would have thought that it would have been a breakthrough, but the arbitrary policing that has been in place for 5.5 years, you think of it, every 28 hours a policeman shoots a young black youth. That's been going on now for 6 years under the Obama presidency.
Let me stop you for just a moment, because you've raised so many issues there, and you've put so much symbolic weight on this watershed moment, as you see it, of the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. But surely that is a deeply unfair way of looking at Barack Obama's contribution over 6 years of his presidency, just to say that this particular moment signals his entire failure across the board.
Yeah, no, because what he promised was more equality. Wall Street presidency's more inequality. What he promised was a more just foreign policy. Drones, more unjust. What he promised was a more free America, massive surveillance, less free, and now
sure,
when it comes to issues of race.
But Cornel West, I mean, politics isn't black and white, and if we just stick with race for a moment, because obviously you've spent your career with your African American studies background and with your campaigning and your public speaking, you have devoted your life to thinking about the black African American experience, and surely you would acknowledge that Barack Obama has made real efforts to change the dynamic in America over the last 6 years. And one shooting or a host of particular incidents cannot take away his effort to change.
No, certainly he's made some efforts. I mean, healthcare was significant in terms of gaining access.
But I'm just thinking on the race issue. For example, since Ferguson, he said, look, we are going to pour hundreds of millions of dollars into retraining the police. We are going to insist that the police go out with body cameras. 50,000 body cameras going to be issued to police officers to ensure that they play by the rules when they are dealing with young black men. Doesn't that make a difference to you?
Yeah, but those are symbolic, though. Look at it this way, that it was 4.5 years ago we saw the massive transfer of military gear to local policemen. That's under not just Barack Obama, that's under a black Attorney General, Eric Holder.
That's right. Who now says, by the way, that we are going to, and the Justice Department, make a real effort to end the practice of racial profiling. So I come back to my point.
Right.
Yes, of course, there are still many problems.
6 years, every 28 hours, a black youth has been shot for 6 years, and now finally we get these symbolic gestures after the massive transfer of huge amounts of military wear to the local policemen. What we're getting is what politicians do. It's calculation. We were looking for a president that had moral conviction and that was concerned with doing what is right, just, and moral, not doing what is just a matter of calculation.
You've, and even in our interview, you've already suggested that it's no good just sort of issuing symbolic words and gestures. But hang on a sec. Is there not something about having a black president in the White House for the last 6 years, which has been symbolically important, and that some of the words he uses, for example, the now famous phrase he used after the killing of the teenager Trayvon Martin in Florida in 2012,
yes.
When Obama went before the public on the TV cameras and he said this about Trayvon Martin. He said, if I had a son, he would look just like Trayvon. And when I think about this boy, I think about my own kids. That is something new for Americans, and doesn't that matter?
That does matter. It matters at the symbolic level. But let me tell you why it's hollow. It's because you had a son, I had a son, shot down by either police or a vigilante. The response to that shooting would not be, we must accept the decision, we are a nation of laws. If a father responds in that way to the death of his son, something is wrong. So the words may come out saying, well, if I had a son, it would look like Trayvon Martin. But when Trayvon was shot, what did he say? He said, we are a nation of laws, we must follow through with the trial and accept the trial. Well, see, fathers don't talk that way.
Yeah, but hang on,
fathers
he's a president. Presidents cannot recommend the breaking of the law.
But you can't use the language of a father and then the next minute act like you're president and represent a unjust rule of law. It's an unjust rule of law. The killing of Michael Brown was unjust, immoral, and wrong. He can't say that. He can't take a stand.
Let's think about the structural issues facing the criminal justice system. And
they're very deep. They're very deep.
Well, and you've gone so deep into this in terms of the statistics, and you can point out, as many others have, that a black man is 21 times more likely, it seems right now, to be shot by the police than a white man if you dig down into the stats. Look at the prison system. I think 1/3 of the entire prison population in the United States is black, despite the fact that African Americans represent only, 12% of the population. So something is going on there.
And the intake, 12% white, 12% black, engaged in drug intake, 65% of convictions are black in America. That's a deeply racist criminal justice system.
So when you say that it's a deeply racist system, what is your prescription for change?
Well, one is you got to call into question the war on drugs. You have to make sure, in fact, that it's not just a war on poor people, that we have to come up with ways in which we will deal with soft drug offensive. I've taught in prison for 37 years now. 2/3 of the folk in my class, 150 brothers every Friday night, 2/3 are in there for soft drugs. Now, if it's soft drugs and 65% of convictions are black and 12% of black and white intake, then we have to bring to an end this war on drugs, which is a war on poor folk. But secondly, you also have to have a fair rule of law. And we're right back to the Obama administration. Crimes committed on Wall Street, market manipulation, insider trading, fraudulent activities. How many Wall Street executives went to jail? Zero. Zero. Which means what? You don't really have a rule of law. You have an unjust rule of law as it relates to punitive treatment of poor, and the well-to-do get off scot-free. Torturers, scot-free. Wiretappers, scot-free. So that it's very clear that we have to have a fair rule of law, and I'm not against police, I'm not against rule of law, I just want to make it fair, I want to make it just, that's all.
I tell you, I read something recently that interested me a lot. I wonder what your take is on this. There's Ellis Coase, he wrote a book called The End of Anger, and a new generation take on race and rage, he called it. Right. And his take on this is that the civil rights traditions of the 50s and the 60s, the demand for changes in the law and a demand to the overt segregation, that mindset doesn't really work in the
present day in the United States, because it's not so much a question of changing the laws, it's a question of changing people's mindsets, attitudes, particularly towards young black men who he says in the media, in the entertainment business, are routinely demonized. So if it's not a question of changing laws, but changing people's hearts and minds, attitudes, how do you do that?
Well, I mean, that's a wonderful question. I mean, I'm here actually for the 50th anniversary of Malcolm X's Oxford Union debate, and he talked very explicitly about not just changing the laws, but one, executing the laws and changing hearts. And you need both. But I give you an example. Take, for example, a number of police who end up shooting these young kids in the back. How many of them are going to jail? Zero. If the law in place, execute the law, send some policemen to jail when they kill young people, but you will get a change in behavior.
You're prejudging what the law would say. If, for example, the grand jury in Ferguson, Missouri, they looked at the evidence involving the particular young police officer who shot Michael Brown, and they weighed the evidence and they concluded that there was no case to answer.
No cross-examination whatsoever. That's not part of the legal process in the United States. Legal process in the United States includes the exposure to both views. That was not the case under Robert McCullough. And we know in America, of course, you can get an indiction over a ham sandwich, as they say. If a criminal prosecutor wants an indictment, he can get it. 1 out of 11,000 cases come down with no indictment. That's what came down in this case. That gives you a sense of the bias, gives you a sense of how tendentious the selective reading of the evidence was. But most importantly, what we're talking about laws here, it's true. You do have to change hearts now. There's no doubt about that. But in terms of executing the law, we have laws against crimes on Wall Street. Do they execute the laws? No. Do they prosecute the law, the Wall Street executives? No. It's not just a matter of laws, it's how do you execute them.
Your inclination is always to look first at the systemic problems rather than the personal issues. Would that be fair?
No, I would say that I keep track of the humanity of poor people. And by keeping track of their humanity, the systemic and the structural goes hand in hand with the individual and the personal. But the problem with my conservative brothers and sisters, they're not really obsessed with the humanity of poor people. They're much more interested in viewing poor people as statistics who can then be used to trivialize their suffering. So I refuse that.
I just wonder whether actually, despite the fact, you know, with your long academic record and your public speaking and your campaigning, a lot of your focus is on race issues in America.
Well, it's class and race.
Well, I was going to say, maybe
the
key to your critique of America is actually about class and about economics and about the distribution of economic power. It's not really about race at all.
Well, it's about both. It's about both. But I'm concerned about gender too. Patriarchy is vicious in America in terms of the treatment of women. I'm concerned about homophobia in terms of gay and lesbian brothers and sisters. But I'm just concerned about injustice in whatever form it takes.
When you said that, you know, Obama's more comfortable with the white rich man than he is with the free black man, that seemed to me to be conflating the two things in an unfair way to Obama, almost like you're saying any successful black politician or African-American success story in culture or the business world has to be, by definition, some sort of Uncle Tom.
No, not at all, because there's a significant number of black businessmen and women who are deeply concerned about working and poor people. There's politicians. There's Bernie Sanders, for example. He is a mainstream politician concerned about the power.
Well, yeah, but he's not really a mainstream politician because he's actually an independent.
But he's a senator in the United States Senate.
In a party of one. I mean, he's an independent, a very well-known maverick independent. But take black politicians, not just Obama. Let's not get hung up on Obama. But like Cory Booker in New Jersey or Deval Patrick in Massachusetts. These are very successful mainstream black politicians who many in the black community, it seems to me, would look up to and aspire to follow. But you seem to say, no, they're just gatekeepers of the establishment.
I just had dinner with Brother Cory Booker just last week. I've known him since he was a student at Yale Law School, supported him all the way in his career, always as a critic and a supporter. But when you look at what he says about poverty, and he's very strong when he talks about poverty, he's pushing the issue of poverty. Look at what he's doing about the criminal justice system, full-scale reform.
If you were an Hispanic intellectual, public figure today, Do you think you'd be as hard on Obama? Because Obama has just gone out on a limb, used his executive powers to ensure that up to 5 million illegal immigrants no longer need fear the daily threat of deportation. You look at the response of Hispanic community groups across the country. I'm just looking at one here. Gustavo Torres from the Casa de Maryland says, this is an extraordinary step in the right direction. So this president that you characterize as weak and spineless and having failed to represent the minorities that in many ways put him into power, he has done something extraordinarily courageous.
Why? Because Obama's deported more illegal immigrants than any other president in the history of the nation. They have shifted because of this bold step. I support the bold step, even though it wasn't bold enough. It wasn't bold enough, no benefits. So they still paying taxes, but no benefits. It's only for 3 years. 3 years from now, it could be completely undercut. But yes, it is a bold step. But no, I try to be, though, brother, I try to be a person of principle. I want to be a person that follows a certain vision that holds across the board, no matter what color people are. People expect me not to be critical of Obama because he's black and because I'm black. I refuse to do that.
I think you've gone the other way. I think you're more critical of Obama because he's black than you would have been if he was white.
I was just as critical of Bill Clinton when he signed the welfare bill. My God, if we had talked to each other in 1996.
People will want to hear this. This is a recent tweet of yours about Obama. You referred to his quote, and you didn't have many words to play with, but you got a few in.
Right.
Empty neutrality, his moral bankruptcy, and his cowardice. And in a different quote, you said he's a Rockefeller Republican in blackface. I can't imagine anything more personally rude, aggressively rude, than essentially calling Obama, that terrible phrase, an Oreo, a guy who's black on the outside.
I never use that language.
But when you say he's a Republican in blackface,
a Republican in black because of Republican policies.
Yeah, I know, but you know what?
Republican policies.
You're pushing the envelope of insult here, and I just wonder if it's personal for you because he's black.
No, man, I don't think so. I think if you look at what I said about Clinton, my God, George Bush. I mean, the things I said about George Bush were even more hyperbolic in many ways. But even Bill Clinton, who was loved by black America, when the mandatory sentencing when it came to prisons and the elimination of welfare, my language was very strong. And it's strong precisely because it reflects not only my own righteous indignation, but also because of the expectations they generated and the promises they put forward that they then failed to execute.
I was going to say, I mean,
failed to execute.
You've done a lot of community activism, and you go around the nation talking to community groups. You know that Barack Obama, and indeed his wife, spent long years in Chicago, in community organization, in the sorts of places helping people that you want to work to. And does that count for nothing?
But no, it's because when he got into positions of power, let's look, for example, in terms of Middle East. Barack Obama, 10 years ago, was talking about the dignity of Palestinians and how important they were. Soon as he gets into office, 400 Palestinian babies are killed. He won't say a mumbling word. A mumbling word. Meaning what? Meaning that right when it comes to a context where he's wielding power, both rhetorical power and political power, that's where he's tested. 10 years ago, he was talking about the dignity of Palestinians, how wrong the occupation was. No, he got in a position and will not be honest about either what he believes or what he once believed and no longer believes in terms of how wrong occupation is and how wrong the killing of innocent babies actually.
I just wonder whether you've left a lot of your own African American community behind in the strength of your condemnation of Obama, because I'm interested in these words of a young black writer called David Dennis. He's the creative director of a website called The Smoking Section. He says this about you, and I want you to respond to it. He says, Cornel West has become a hater. When I was in college, I wanted to grow up to emulate Cornel West. He influenced millions of young black Americans, but now I feel sad at the way he's let pettiness and his pride overshadow his desire to effect real change.
Well, I'm so glad he doesn't speak on behalf of large numbers of young people. You go to the young leaders of Ferguson right now, you ask Ashley Yates, you ask Tefpo, you ask Alexis Templeton, you ask Tori Russell, and so many of those right there in the heat of struggle, they call me uncle. Why? Because I was there with him, arrested with him, Why? Because they know I am a hater. I hate injustice. I don't hate people. I am a hater.
You sometimes give the impression you hate Barack Obama.
I hate Barack Obama's policies. I hate his deeds. I hate his cowardice. I hate his acts. I love him as a human being. I'm a Christian now, so that this is a deeply personal issue in terms of how you separate a righteous indignation of people's policies, deeds, and acts from their humanity, because people can change. And because we're all made in the image of God, and I love that image no matter who they are. But yes, I am a hater of injustice, no doubt about that. So the young brother, he said, well, when he saw me 20 years ago, I was hating injustice then. I'm going to go down hating injustice. That's the kind of person I am.
A final thought for you, and we talked about this a little earlier about the civil rights movement and what it achieved and what it didn't achieve. And you've said that you believe if Martin Luther King were alive today in the United States, he would be weeping about the state of the United States today. And you know, you're very strong in your condemnation of the failings of the traditional civil rights groups like the NAACP, the National Urban League. You say that they're not delivering for the African American community. And you use a word. The word is revolution. You say the United States needs a revolution. Is that what you have become, an advocate of revolution?
I've always been a revolutionary Christian. My first book published 32 years ago, Prophesied Deliverance, an Afro-American revolutionary Christian.
But to me, revolution implies a tearing down of the status quo by violence if necessary.
Oh, no. It's a fundamental transformation of both the priorities, the values. It is a transfer of wealth from oligarchs and plutocrats to ordinary citizens, but it's a democratic process. But no, we have already seen a massive transfer of wealth from the poor and working class to the well-to-do in the last 30 years. All I'm calling for is a massive transfer of power and wealth from the 1% who now own 43% of the wealth in America. 1% own 43% of the wealth. Now, I can't see how anybody can talk about the future of a democracy without there being some kind of transfer of wealth back to working and poor people.
Yeah, but the point is, how do you do it? I mean,
it's by means of progressive taxation, it's by means of stronger trade unions, it's by means of the kind of investments in education, in infrastructure, basic kinds of moves that other societies, much more civilized than the United States, Norway, Finland, Sweden, other places where they're concerned about quality education, concerned about quality jobs, and concerned about eliminating poverty. That's all.
And you know what? I'm sure there are many people like you in the United States who would like to see the US transformed into Sweden, but the system as it stands in the US ain't going to deliver that. So my final question is this.
So I got to keep telling the truth.
Well, but how far do you go in that cause of yours? Because we have seen flames licking around Ferguson, Missouri in recent weeks. We've seen people on the streets in other towns also very nearly confronting the police in demonstrations. There is a sense that there could be a new round of violent confrontation in the United States over this issue.
You got to
keep in mind.
Keep in mind, anytime you talk about violence, you're talking about already police violence against poor black folk. If it's every 28 hours a black person getting shot, that is violence. The response of black people is important, and the response has to be filtered through love and justice rather than hatred and revenge.
Have you fallen out of love with your country?
I'm in love with the people in the country. We've got some great people in America, but America's not a great nation. Greatness is not measured by how big your buildings are. It's not measured by your military might. It's measured by how you treat the least of these, how you treat the poor, how you treat working people. That's greatness. That's the difference between Alexander the Great and the Jesus that I am in love with.
We have to end there. Cornel West, thank you for being on HARDtalk.
Thank you so much, my brother. Appreciate it. Appreciate it.